Greetings, I hope you're good and well. This video is about 5 short stories for pessimists and anti-natalists, you could say. I'm currently on a break from reading philosophy books like that, like Ligotti and David Benatar. I feel as though I've exposed myself to that material enough now. I've got the message, I don't really need it drummed into me anymore. But I know of 5 short stories, fiction stories, that seem to contain that kind of pessimistic philosophy. Each one of these 5 stories that I'm about to mention has a character in them who discovers some kind of weird, dark secret that causes them to lose the will to live. Okay, so let's start. The first story I'm going to mention here is called The Nightmare Box by Chuck Palahniuk. The story starts off in a charity shop, and there's this weird black box in the charity shop. It's shiny, it's on a tripod, and it's got an eyepiece on it. And somewhere within the box there's a ticking noise. The ticking noise could go on for 1 hour, 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year. But when the ticking noise stops, you're supposed to put your eye to the eyepiece and take a look inside the box. The charity shop owner, an old man, looks inside the box, and shortly afterwards he loses the will to live. He hangs himself. After that, his son, who works in the charity shop, looks inside the box, and he was once an aspiring lawyer with all of these dreams and aspirations ahead of him. But after looking in this nightmare box, he spent his days sitting in the corner of a dusty room with cockroaches crawling in and out of his shirt collar, just basically staring up at the walls, with just no will to go out and live another day in any aspirational way. Then an art gallery owner buys the box, takes it to his art gallery. There's a huge exhibition, and a woman turns up with her teenage daughter, and they've got no idea what this box is and the power of the box. And the woman lets her teenage daughter look inside it, and after looking inside the box, her shoulders slump down. She gets this dull, drab look on her face, and she goes home and she just cuts off her eyelashes, and then she disappears. And it's a really disturbing story. I'm not a fan of everything that Chuck Palahniuk writes, but this story in particular is my personal favourite. And it's explained that you never get to see what's in the box, but it's explained that after you look inside the box, you realise that everything, all of these trivialities that you deal with every day, all of these little things that you worry about are just completely insignificant in every way. That's the message that you get after looking inside the box. The Nightmare Box story can be found inside Haunted, which was published in 2005, and I highly recommend getting the book just for this one short story contained within it. The next story I'm going to mention here is The Occupant of the Room by Algernon Blackwood. This was published sometime in the 20th century, the mid-20th century, and it's about a man who goes hiking in the mountains. And he needs a place to stay for the night, and he finds this hotel. All of the rooms are occupied in the hotel, but the receptionist says, look, there was a woman who was renting a room upstairs, but she disappeared a couple of days ago and we haven't heard from her. You can stay in her room, but if she comes back, you might have to vacate the room. So he stays in this room, and while he's in there, he's overcome with this really strong sense of depression. He starts having these pessimistic thoughts and musings, and you're kind of like, you see his internal musings and as he thinks about life. And it is literally like reading a page from Thomas Ligotti's Conspiracy Against the Human Race. These thoughts that the man has while he's in this hotel room, staring out the window at the mountains, it's like that the day before he was all bright and perky, but now everything he sees is laced with this grey misery and pointlessness. And it is just so in tune with the whole anti-natalist pessimistic philosophy. It's incredible. You can find this story in this book here, and to the best of my knowledge, it's actually free to download. So if you go onto Amazon and look for this book, you can actually read this story for free. The next story is called Lazarus. I've mentioned this one before on this channel briefly, but I'll mention it again. The author is called Leonid Andreev. It was published in the turn of the 20th century. The author was Russian. It's about a man called Lazarus who rises up from the grave, and he's described as this bloated, pale, corpse-like man who just wanders around with this look of unspeakable horror in his eyes. Everybody who looks into his eyes is disturbed and they just can't bear to be around him. And they lose the will to live. Those who meet him and actually look into his eyes lose the will to live because they get this weird message from his eyes. Music turns to meaningless sounds to Lazarus and everybody else. There are scenes where he goes out into the hot sun and stares at the sun for hours, but the sun doesn't warm him up. His body is blue and cold. The coldness of the universe is within his soul and nothing can warm him. The empty void of the cosmos is described here, and the hollowness of objects and the hollowness and hopelessness of life is described in a great way here. And there's a scene with an artist. He meets an artist, and the artist looks into his eyes, as do a lot of people in the story. And the artist just kind of loses all vitality, and something is drained away from him. And then he goes on to do this sculpture. He makes this sculpture, and it's like a weird, ugly mass of objects trying to part ways from each other. And upon this ugly, weird blob, there's one beautiful, perfect butterfly sitting on one of the twigs. And I actually think it's a metaphor for, it kind of states that beauty is only weak. Beauty is like a thin veneer sitting on top of the huge ugliness of life. It's like a weird metaphor. It's a nice touch in the story. At the end of the story, he meets Emperor Augustus as well, but I won't spoil the story. This story can also be found in the Big Book of Masters, which is free on Amazon. Thank you for making it to the halfway point of this video. This is a quick message to let you know that I have a range of horror and sci-fi horror books available, and most of them are free. If you enjoy my videos, you might also enjoy my stories. And if you want to receive exclusive content relating to the world of books and horror, consider joining my mailing list. You'll even get 2 free audiobooks for doing so. Finally, if you want to support my work, you can make a donation to my PayPal tip jar. All the links are below. Thank you. Now back to the video. The next story is another story by Algernon Blackwood. This one is called The Man Who Found Out. It's about Professor Mark Ebor, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is a scientist with mystical tendencies. He hears about these stone tablets in a foreign land. I think they might be in the Middle East. He travels to this foreign land. He finds these stone tablets, which are written in a foreign language, and he somehow manages to translate them. And then he comes back he arrives back in England, and his assistant notices that he's a mere shell of a man. He's got no luggage. He brings back no luggage. He's scruffy, and his personality has changed. And he just kind of goes through the motions of life after translating the message on these weird stone tablets. He doesn't really focus on his work. He was once an aspiring scientist, but now he just can't be bothered. He just loses the will to live, and he eventually dies. And his assistant is then left with these stone tablets and the translation, which he was told never to look at and never to read. But of course he does. And then the same thing happens to his assistant. And the message that he reads is so awful and so soul-destroying that he actually goes to a hypnotist and tries to get his memory erased of what he read. I won't go into it too much. I don't want to ruin the story, but I think this book can also be found in the Big Book of Masters. If not, you can actually find it for free online as a single story. I'm pretty sure you can find it quite easily on Google. Last but certainly not least is a story from J.G. Ballard, quite surprisingly. This story is called Message from Mars, and it's set in the future, and it involves NASA and space. In this future world, China or some Asian country has landed on the moon after America, and so America wants to reassert itself as the dominant space agency, and so NASA decides to send a crew of 5 astronauts to Mars, and it's turned into a kind of reality TV show. There are cameras in this spaceship, and people can watch the astronauts on TV like a Big Brother style TV show. And I'm pretty sure this story was written before Big Brother became a thing, so it's quite prescient in that sense. So they fly up to Mars and everyone's watching on TV, but they can only see the inside of the ship. They don't see what happens when they land on Mars. And then after a few weeks, it's time for them to return to Earth, and you've got everybody at the NASA landing strip. You've got all of the press and the scientists and the technicians and everybody, and they're waiting for this space vessel to land back down, and they're waiting to see the crew once again. And so it lands back down, and then it all goes quiet, and they're waiting for the doors to open, but nothing happens. And then glances are exchanged between all the technicians and the organisers, but the doors just don't open. And then somebody goes up to the door and kind of knocks on it, says, okay, it's time to get out, but they just refuse to open the door. And there's no protest, there's no violence. The astronauts are just sitting in this ship, content in the ship, and they just don't want to move. And they're just sitting there for hours and then days and then weeks, and they just can't get them out. In the end, they put this spaceship into this hangar, this warehouse hangar, and scientists kind of x-ray it, and they try to see what the astronauts are doing, but they're just pottering about in there, just ironing their clothes, playing chess or whatever. And then a team of psychologists try to coax them out with a megaphone. That doesn't work. And so they just stay in this ship for so long that NASA actually becomes defunded, and the hangar is handed over to a National Parks Institute. But still the astronauts are in there, and they just repair the ship. They just live this quiet little life in the ship. And then a group of entrepreneurs come along and entertainers, and they rent this hangar for shows, but the spaceship is still there. And then eventually the hangar is demolished, and then this spaceship is sitting there in the desert under the stars and under the moon. everybody's gone home, but the astronauts are still in there. And I won't totally ruin the story. I've ruined some of it, but 62 years go by and the astronauts are still in this spaceship. And the reason they're in there is because when they landed on Mars, they saw something or they learnt something that made them lose the will to live. Now, this isn't stated in the story. Nothing. It doesn't say that they've lost the will to live, and you certainly don't get to see what they saw on Mars. But my interpretation is a kind of pessimistic one. And it seems to me that they lost the will to live after seeing something on Mars. Okay? Now, this particular short story can be found in the Complete Short Stories of J.G. Ballard, Volume 2. I think you'll have to pay for this one. It's on Amazon. So, there you go. 5 short stories to read if you fancy losing the will to live. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back in a week or two with some kind of book review video. In the meantime, try to have a good day on this depressing, pessimistic, suicidal piece of rock we call Earth. Lots of love. Goodbye.